let's talk about how to capture light with our realistic pencil drawings. When working in pencil, specifically with botanical drawings, there are a few key techniques to remember in order to capture the life behind your subject and showcase the delicate beauty without becoming too heavy or awkward. In this video, I'm going to share with you some of my favorite pencil shading techniques that I think will help you take your realistic shading to the next level. A quick interruption in this video because as I was editing it, I realized that this didn't end up being the step-by-step video that I had originally planned. Sometimes in the editing process, videos, the subjects, the content, it just kind of morphs because there are certain things that I want to talk about. However, I did record almost the entire process of drawing these florals. So if you would like to see the full process of this, or at least more of a step-by-step, more of a working through it process video, let me know in the comment section down below and I will work on editing that for you. But if in the meantime you would like to see some of my favorite techniques and just tips for working with shading and making it a little bit easier for you, go ahead and finish this video. The first thing you want to start with is a clear reference photo or view of your reference if you're working from life. I personally like to work from photos most of the time because it's more adaptable to my frequently interrupted lifestyle.
Mom.
Okay.
Mommy. No.
When you're looking for a reference image, you want to make sure that there's some good contrast between definitely the midtones and the shadows, not to mention the highlights. This is because images that are too soft can be difficult to translate to the paper and can be more challenging to capture. Think of it like a monotone voice. While you can understand what is being said, it's not only more interesting when there are fluctuations in the speaker's voice, but it's actually easier to understand what they are saying beyond the words themselves if you have some of that variety in there. It's a similar idea for value contrast. Variety with how light and how dark the shadows in your drawing are makes it both more interesting and more easy to understand what's going on. Next, you want to build a strong foundation with your contour drawing. I like to draw pretty light overall for the outline so that it's not too harsh when I'm adding the shadows in. I don't want it to, look like everything has been outlined with a Sharpie. If you struggle to draw lightly, try holding your pencil farther back or work with a harder pencil lead such as an HB or an H. I recently shared the video where I created this exact contour drawing, and in that video I broke down my go-to techniques for drawing accurate proportions and keeping everything on the same scale. So if you struggle to capture the outline of your subject, you will likely struggle to capture the shading as well. Go ahead and check out that video to hear some of my tips for a strong drawing foundation. Tip 3 is for right before you start working on adding the shadows. Take a moment to mentally plan out your shadows. Study your reference image and decide what areas are going to be more high key with lots of lighter values or more low key with lots of darker values. It's good to have a mix of both. Planning this out a little bit beforehand will help prevent going too heavy with your shadows and staining your paper or taking forever because you're just starting way too light. If you're struggling with this step, you can convert your reference photo to a black and white image in your settings and break it down from there. All right, now it's time to start in on the pencil shading itself. I actually like to start in the deeper shadows. Some artists will say to always work from the opposite of your dominant hand to avoid smudging. So as a right-handed person, I would work from left to right. I actually find that I don't need to worry about this for the most part because I will use a piece of tissue or scrap paper between my hand and the paper to avoid any smudging. I prefer to start in the shadows to give my hand another chance to warm up, and it helps me to kind of get into the groove without having to worry too much about, getting dark too fast or scarring my paper. It takes me a minute sometimes to get into the rhythm of shading well, where my pencil is gliding smoothly on the paper, my sensitivity to the different values is strong, and it helps me to just get ready for the big leagues, meaning the more complicated shapes and gradients. If you are struggling to get into the flow of shading and your pencil's scarring the paper or your gradients aren't very smooth, go ahead, grab a scrap piece of paper and make a gradient. Just as a further warm up, it'd be better to warm up more fully on a scrap piece of paper than to transfer your struggles onto your final piece. As you're progressing along with your shading, you want to continue to break down individual shadows into smaller shapes instead of trying to conquer the entire subject with a single swoosh of the pencil. If only it were that easy, right? Drawing out individual shapes and simply connecting them to the next shape will help to keep you from getting overwhelmed. All right, this shadow is a good example of how we can break this down just into more shapes. We've got kind of this quick little, it's not quite triangular, not quite rectangular, an irregular polygram. So I've got that marked in, and then we've got this kind of triangular shape here that then moves into this rectangle, almost like a horse's head and neck that moves down. And you just want to go kind of one section at a time. And if you mess up, that's why we start light. And then we've kind of got, I've already started a little bit of like the horses, following that neck down, and then we almost have a tail. So maybe instead of a horse, it is a very unromantic rooster. And we'll fill this in. So I'm looking as I'm filling this in. This is a darker value than this, but I think because this needs lightened just a touch. Once those individual shapes have been laid out like a puzzle, you can step back a little bit, and I mean literally lean back in your chair. You might need to step away from it just to get a more clear picture of the whole, and make sure that everything is reading well together, kind of like trying to see the forest for the trees. Sometimes you have to make adjustments to the whole to help it make sense within the rest of the drawing. Not every shading project has the wherewithal to behave itself on the first try, unfortunately, but having the individual puzzle pieces in place helps to make it easier to join them together by either lightly erasing or lightly shading over specific areas just to kind of unify them and again, get them to kind of read correctly. So for botanicals, I tend to go petal by petal. So I'll work on one petal and then I'll step back and see how does this fit with a whole? Is it reading well overall? So I broke down those individual shapes, but is it now looking a little bit too puzzle piecey, a little bit too patchwork quilty? Then I might need to either lighten the whole thing a little bit or go over certain areas just to unify them so that they're not too broken up. And then to finish everything off, I again like to take a step back. Sometimes I'll even do this the next day, so I've had just a mental break from the piece as a whole, and I like to grab my kneaded eraser. And even though I've been using this throughout the process, and if you don't have a kneaded eraser, please, I highly recommend that you go get one. It is one of my very favorite weapons of mass creation, my very favorite drawing tools, and I use it constantly, especially for steps like this. So for this last step, I'm looking for those more subtle changes in the shadows. So I'm really studying my reference image, kind of going petal by petal, or really more for the petals that I want to have a little bit more detail or that are a little bit more of a focal point. So petals in the front, petals that are more interesting. I'm looking for that reflected light, the more subtle changes in the shadows. If you're not familiar with the concept of reflected light or just looking for different elements within a shadow, I highly recommend going through and studying the anatomy of a shadow. You can do this either in my full shading course, or you can do this just by studying geometric shapes as a whole and shading them more frequently, and you'll start to kind of pick up on some of those nuances. It's a little bit easier with geometric shapes because it's just broken down a little bit more. So anyway, I like to go through with the kneaded eraser and just pick up some lighter elements. I usually don't work with a clean kneaded eraser, so I'll work with kind of a dirty section of the kneaded eraser so that I'm picking up a very subtle amount of value. And that really helps to kind of polish off the piece overall. And with that, we have a finished botanical drawing. If you have not done so already and you've made it this far, be sure to hit that subscribe button and leave this emoji in the comment section for me down below. And let me know what part of pencil shading you find either the most difficult, or what is a technique that somebody has told you about that has really changed the way that you approach shading or how you understand it, or just how it kind of helped make things click. All right, I hope that you are having a wonderful, wonderful day. And until next time, happy drawing.